The A-10 shuddered violently as Major Elena Ward fought to control the aircraft, her hands gripping the controls, her knuckles white, the engine screaming in protest, the canyon walls looming impossibly close, the shadow above moving with a speed that defied reason, twisting and diving as if it had no gravity to obey. She pushed the throttle full forward, trusting instinct over instruments, the altimeter spinning wildly as if mocking her. Smoke and dust filled the cockpit, the smell of burning. Metal choking her as she leveled the wings for a straight pass through the narrowest part of the canyon. The explosion behind her still sending shock waves rolling through the rocks, her heart pounding in sync with the roar of the engines. Every sense heightened, every movement precise, the SEALs below shouting over the comms, urging her to give them cover. Their voices a lifeline and a reminder that she was not alone. The shadow above descended again, a streak of impossible brightness twisting, faster than thought. Elena banked hard to the left, scraping the edge of the cliff, her stomach twisting with the G-forces, the A-10, trembling under the strain of extreme maneuvers, her eyes fixed on the canyon floor, where enemy positions moved like ants trying to flee the wrath from the sky. She opened fire again, the cannon spitting rounds tearing through rock and metal, the echo rolling through the canyon like thunder trapped between stone. The right engine coughed violently. Warning lights. Flashing across the cockpit, smoke curling around the edges of the canopy. She adjusted throttle and fuel, trying to stabilize the aircraft. The vibration intense, but she could not slow down. She could not hesitate, the canyon twisting sharply ahead. Leaving barely enough room for the jet to pass, she leaned into the turn, banking hard, scraping past jagged rocks, sparks flying as the wings brushed stone. She held her breath, waiting for the inevitable. The SEALs' voices returned one final shout, telling her to aim for the extraction point. Now she had no time to think, no room for error. She pushed forward, her focus, absolute every second, stretching into eternity, the shadow above twisting impossibly faster, every maneuver she threw matched and surpassed by the streak of light that seemed alive, intent on intercepting her. She could feel the heat of its movement in the air, the roar of engines mingling with the sound of rushing wind. The canyon walls rose sharply, a blind curve approaching, and she had no way to see around it. She relied entirely on instinct. The jet trembling beneath her each motion, a test of nerve and skill, her heart pounding, her pulse syncing with the roar of the engines. She banked sharply, scraping past the cliff. Edged the shadow above, diving once more, a streak of brightness that made the rock seem darker by comparison. She fired the cannon again, hoping to disrupt its path. Suddenly, the A-10 lurched violently, a shock wave from another blast hitting the cliff. Nearby, the metal groaning, the instruments flickering, the smoke curling into the cockpit. Her vision partially obscured. She gritted her teeth and fought for control, adjusting the throttle, banking into the curve, trusting instincts honed over years. Of training and missions, nothing else mattered. Not fear, not pain, not even survival, only control and precision and the knowledge that the SEALs were counting on her. The shadow above twisted downward in a sudden dive, closer than ever she could see. The outline now massive, impossible, dark and moving, like it had no respect for laws of physics or gravity. She pulled back on the stick hard, the A-10 groaning under the force, the altimeter spinning, the engines screaming, the canyon walls a blur of rock and shadow. She barely cleared a jagged ridge, sparks flying from the wingtips as she scraped past the cliff edge, inches from death. Smoke filled the cockpit, her eyes watering, the roar of the engines deafening. She adjusted the cannon, ready to fire again as the shadow twisted directly above her. Another streak of light brighter than the sun passing dangerously close, the wind buffeting the jet violently. She leaned into the controls, trusting her instincts and the feel of the aircraft. Beneath her wings, she could almost sense its movement, as if anticipating her every move. The SEALs shouted again, their voices distant but urgent. She followed their coordinates, moving lower to provide cover, their extraction point in sight. But still, Too far the canyon twisting unpredictably, each turn a knife edge, each dip a potential tomb. She had no margin for error. She pushed the throttle to the limit, feeling the strain of the aircraft under extreme stress. Every muscle in her body coiled. Like a spring waiting for the next challenge, the shadow above weaving impossibly around her. Then a sudden flash directly in front of her, the brightness blinding for a heartbeat. She felt the jet lurch violently. The controls resisting her, she could see only light and shadow. Her stomach twisting as the canyon walls seemed to close in around her. She fought to maintain altitude and speed, the engines screaming, the metal groaning, every instinct telling her to pull up. But there was nowhere to go, only forward and through. Her pulse surged. She adjusted the throttle and banking the jet once more, trying to escape the impossible, the shadow above twisting faster than ever. And then she saw it, a ridge ahead, impossibly steep, jagged rock jutting, like teeth, a cliff that seemed to rise from nowhere. Blocking her path, the seal's extraction point still distant, and the shadow diving at her with unrelenting speed, and in that moment she realized she would have to make a choice between survival and the impossible maneuver that could save them all. Major Elena Ward gritted her teeth, the A-10 trembling beneath her, her pulse hammering in her chest, the canyon walls rising impossibly close, the ridge ahead jagged and merciless, a wall of stone that seemed to mock her, every maneuver. The shadow above twisting faster than thought, its streaks of light cutting through the sky like knives. She could feel the heat of its movement in the air, the roar of the engines mingling with the rush of wind against her body. She adjusted the throttle, banking hard, the A-10 groaning under the strain, the controls vibrating with every motion, sparks flying from the wingtips. As the jet scraped past jagged rock inches from disaster, she leaned into the curves, trusting instincts honed over years of flying and combat, every decision made in a heartbeat, every movement calculated by experience and raw courage, the SEAL's extraction point still ahead, but still far, and the enemy below moving, with lethal intent. Smoke curled into the cockpit, the smell of burning metal stinging her eyes. Her vision blurred, but she focused on the canyon ahead, the shadow above diving again, its impossible speed twisting around her like a predator circling. Prey, she pulled back on the stick. Hard, the engines screaming, the A-10 resisting the force. But obeying her hands, she forced the jet upward, the ridge looming closer every second, the altimeter spinning, the G-forces threatening to pin her into the seat. She leveled the wings for a straight run, the shadow above matching every maneuver. Her heart pounding, her mind entirely focused on survival, the SEAL's voices over the radio urging her forward, their words urgent but broken by static. They were counting on her, trusting her to make it through. She gritted her teeth, the canyon twisting sharply, the walls seeming to close around her, the extraction point still distant, the impossible maneuver she had to make forming in her mind. The A-10 dived. Once more, the engines roaring, the controls vibrating violently. She aimed for the narrowest part of the canyon, a gap barely wide enough for the jet to pass the shadow above, twisting down at impossible angles. She opened fire again, the cannon spitting. Rounds tearing through rock and enemy positions below, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like thunder, trapped in stone debris flying around the cockpit, sand and dust swirling into the air. She pulled up sharply, banking hard, scraping past the cliff edge, sparks flying as the metal scraped against rock. She could feel the A-10 straining under the extreme maneuvers, the right engine sputtering, but holding the jet, responding to every motion, her instincts guiding her through the impossible. She felt the adrenaline surge, every fiber of her body focused on the task ahead, the SEALs counting on her every second, stretching into eternity. Then the shadow above twisted, suddenly diving lower, its brightness blinding for a heartbeat. She ducked. Instinctively, the jet lurching violently, the canyon floor rushing up to meet her. She leveled the wings, adjusting throttle, banking hard. She could feel the wind clawing at the aircraft like a living thing. The ridge ahead approaching faster than, thought she had to thread the needle or risk losing everything. She gritted her teeth and made the move she had calculated in a heartbeat. The A-10 dipping low, scraping past jagged rock banking sharply just enough to clear the ridge, the shadow above. Twisting impossibly fast, but forced to alter its path. The engines screaming, the metal groaning, the jet trembling under the strain. But holding, she pushed forward, trusting the instincts that had carried her this far and the aircraft obeying her. "Hands perfectly!" The SEALs shouted over the radio, relief and disbelief in their voices. They could see her making the run, providing cover and clearing the way for their extraction. She adjusted the cannon firing rounds at the enemy below, disrupting. Their advance giving the SEALs precious seconds, the canyon twisting sharply behind her, sparks flying from rocks. She barely cleared every obstacle. A masterful dance of precision and courage. The A-10 surged forward, the engines roaring full power. The shadow above now receding, forced back by her impossible maneuvers. The ridge behind her, the extraction point finally within sight, the SEALs rushing toward it, moving like ants, guided by the path she had cleared. She pushed the teat. The flash of light grew brighter as Major Eleanor Ward gritted her teeth. Her hands steady on the controls, the A-10 groaning as it fought against the wind and gravity, her eyes scanning the sky for any sign of what was coming toward her, the canyon. Walls rising on either side like the jaws of some ancient beast, waiting to swallow her whole. She felt the jet tremble under her as if sensing the danger before her mind could catch up. She pushed the throttle forward, the engine whining in protest. The shadows on the canyon floor stretching long and thin with the morning sun turning everything into shapes she could almost recognize. Shapes that belonged to no man-made thing. The radio crackled, the SEALs shouting, but their voices distant, muffled. As if carried through layers of stone and dust, she could barely focus on their coordinates. Her attention drawn upward to the streak of light that moved faster than any aircraft she had ever seen. The A-10 tilted sharply, banking into the canyon walls, scraping past a ridge that sent showers of rock into the wind, her heart pounding in sync with the roar of the engines. She tried to identify the light. A missile, another plane, or something worse. Her instincts screamed at her to climb, but the canyon offered no room for error. She dipped lower, trusting her senses and the feel of the aircraft beneath her wings. The shadow shifted above her, moving in impossible angles, twisting and folding against the sunlight. She realized she was not just being approached, she was being hunted by something that defied the rules of the air, something that could turn and accelerate faster than any human could control. A shiver ran down her spine. The canyon suddenly seemed too small, too narrow, too fragile, for the two of them to exist in the same space. She rolled the jet hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a jutting rock formation. The engines screamed, the altimeter spinning wildly as if trying to warn her of impending disaster. Below, her hands moved, over the controls with the precision of a surgeon. Every motion calculated, every response instinctive. The shadow followed without hesitation, mocking her maneuvers, teasing her with the speed it possessed. She felt the pull of fear, but did not let it consume her. The SEALs shouted again, radio crackling with panic. She could barely make out words. Stay low, keep moving. Their voices urging her forward. She adjusted her approach, the canyon curving sharply ahead, a tunnel of rock that might allow her to escape if she could just make it without hitting the walls. The shadow above her made a sudden dive, its brightness blinding the cockpit for a second that stretched longer than time itself, and she had to trust her instincts more than anything. Else smoke and dust filled her vision as she leveled the aircraft. The cannon still hot from previous rounds, she could see flashes of enemy positions below, moving like ants scrambling for cover, unaware of the real danger above their focus on the ground had blinded them to what was coming from the sky. She took a deep breath, the sound of the engines and wind filling her ears. everything else falling away. Her mind emptied, leaving only the rhythm of the flight, the tension, the pulse of life, hanging on a thread. The A-10 dipped sharply, once more, the canyon walls scraping past as she threaded through the narrow passage. Her body pressed against the seat as if gravity itself tried to pin her down. She could feel the heat from the engines, mixing with sweat on her skin. Her eyes catching every glint of light from the shadow above, knowing that one wrong move could send her plummeting into the jagged rocks below. She forced herself to focus on speed and maneuverability, trusting that the aircraft would obey her commands. Suddenly, the shadow above split into two streaks of light, twisting around each other like snakes circling prey. She banked hard to the right, the jet whining in protest, the canyon narrowing to a knife edge ahead. She felt the instruments flicker, the altimeter jerking violently. She realized she was approaching a blind curve, one that had no margin for error, one that might trap her if she miscalculated the speed, one that might end everything she had fought for. Her pulse surged as the streaks of light dove lower, matching her descent, matching every maneuver she threw at them. She pushed the throttle to the limit, the engines straining the aircraft, groaning as if begging her to relent. She refused. She would not give in. Not here. Not now she had come too far to be turned back by something she could not yet name. She tightened her grip and leaned forward, scanning every inch of the canyon ahead. The SEALs' voices broke through the radio one final shout before static took over, telling her that she was alone, that they were counting on her, that there was no turning back. She swallowed hard and adjusted the controls, preparing for the impossible, her eyes locked on the curve ahead. The streaks of light closing in faster than anything she had ever faced in training in combat or imagination. The A-10 hurtled toward the blind, turned the shadow twisting around her, the canyon walls a blur, her heart pounding in her ears, the engines screaming like a living thing, and just as the cliff rose directly in front of her, the streaks of light collided above, leaving a brilliant flash, and everything went black for a heartbeat. The flash vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving Major Elena. Ward, gripping the controls, her knuckles white, her heart hammering in her chest, the canyon seemed darker. Now shadows stretching longer across the ground, as if the walls themselves had leaned in closer to watch her struggle. The A-10 shuddered beneath, her the engines whining but holding. She could feel every vibration as though the jet shared her fear and anticipation. Her eyes scanned the path ahead, twisting sharply the walls of the canyon rising steep and jagged on either side. She could feel the wind whipping past her canopy, each gust threatening to throw the aircraft off course, but she refused to relent. Every movement measured, every adjustment precise. She remembered the training, the long hours in simulators, the countless missions that had prepared her for moments like this. Yet nothing had ever been like this. Nothing had ever demanded everything from her body and mind simultaneously. The comms crackled, the SEALs' voices faint, now lost behind static. They were counting on her. Alone, relying on her skill to hold the line, the radio was no comfort. The words half heard, half swallowed by the canyon echo. She focused on what she could control: the jet, the speed, the angle, the throttle. She leaned into the maneuvers, trusting. Instinct over instruments, and instinct told her that the shadow from above had not left, that whatever she had seen was still there, moving faster than thought, circling, waiting. The terrain tightened, the canyon narrowing to a jagged corridor of rock, with barely enough space to navigate the A-10, her wings scraping the edge of the cliffs. At times, the metal groaning in protest, she pushed the throttle forward, banking hard, as the shadow above swooped down again, the brightness blinding her momentarily, forcing her to squint her eyes and adjust the canopy. She could feel the heat of something passing dangerously close, her instincts screaming to evade, yet she held the line, daring the impossible. The ground below seemed to shift with each second, the SEALs' positions moving like ants, but she had no time to focus on them. She had to survive the canyon. First, she felt the jet tremble as the right engine sputtered again, a warning flickering across the instruments, her hands moving faster then. Thought adjusting power, redistributing fuel, she could not let panic touch her. Not now. Not ever. The aircraft obeyed her, but just barely trembling under the strain of extreme maneuvers and proximity to the jagged rocks. She banked sharply to avoid. A jutting cliff, the shadow above moving impossibly fast, matching her every maneuver. She could hear the roar of the engines echoing against the canyon walls like twin beasts fighting for dominance. She pushed the stick forward, diving through a narrow passage, praying her calculations were right, the walls brushing past her wings, sending showers of dust and rock into the air, her pulse surging as adrenaline filled every vein, her senses heightened beyond normal human limits. The SEALs. Voices returned over the radio, one final burst, shouting coordinates for another extraction point. They were pinned down, the enemy closing, and the time for hesitation had passed. She leveled the wings for a straight run, the canyon floor rushing up. To meet her, the shadow above twisting faster than thought. She opened fire on targets below, trying to provide cover, hoping the rounds would make a difference, hoping she could protect them without losing control of the aircraft itself. Suddenly, the right engine coughed violently, smoke filling the cockpit, a smell of burning metal clawing at her senses. She adjusted the throttle again, trying to stabilize the aircraft. She could see the cliff ahead rising rapidly. There was no room to climb and no room to turn. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, trusting every instinct she had ever honed, the walls. Narrowing, the canyon seemed to reach out to grab her wings. The shadow above diving faster than before, a streak of impossible speed that threatened to crush her. The A-10 trembled violently, the instruments flickering, warning of critical failure, her eyes locked on a jagged opening ahead, a chance to escape the worst of the canyon. She leaned hard into the controls, banking sharply at the last possible moment, scraping past the cliff face inches from disaster, her stomach twisting from the G-forces, her focus. Absolute nothing else mattered. Not fear, not hesitation, only survival and the mission. The SEALs depending on her. Then a sudden explosion shook the air, a shockwave rolling through the canyon, a plume of fire erupting from the ridge ahead. She was thrown against the seat, the A-10 trembling violently. The shadow above momentarily illuminated the BL. The desert air shimmered under the morning sun as the A-10 Thunderbolt waited on the tarmac, its engines silent, its silver body reflecting a heat that seemed to challenge the courage of anyone who dared to fly that low. Major Elena Ward stood beside it, her flight suit clinging to her in the dry wind, her mind echoing with the words of the SEAL team commander who had told her flatly, no one could fly that low, not even you. She remembered the look on his face, a mixture of disbelief and arrogance, as though the limits of the sky belonged to him and his men, as though gravity itself would obey their rules. She had smiled but said nothing because she knew that some challenges were meant to be answered in the air, not on the ground. The briefing room had been tense that morning. Maps spread across the table, showing valleys so narrow they looked like knife wounds on the terrain. The mission was simple on paper. Low pass through enemy territory, provide close air support for an extraction. But the altitude required was beyond what anyone had attempted in the region. Too many ridgelines, too much risk, too little room for error. Elena watched the others file out of the room, their eyes avoiding hers because they all knew she was considering it. The flight no one wanted. The flight no one believed could be done. Her hand had hovered over the map, her pulse steady as she traced the route from memory. She knew the terrain better than anyone. She had studied the wind. She had flown the canyon. Before, not this low, but close enough to feel its pull. The commander's voice still echoed in her ears when she stepped toward the A-10. The crew chief glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "Ma'am, you sure about this?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. She just placed her helmet under her arm, climbed the ladder, and lowered herself into the cockpit. The seat felt heavier that day, as if it understood what she was about to do. The engine started with a roar that cut through the doubt. She rolled. Down the runway, her heart sinking with the turbine's rhythm. The air tower's voice faded into background noise. She could feel the A-10 hum like a living creature beneath her wings. Trembling with restrained fury, she took off the desert dropping. Away behind her as the sky opened before her wide and infinite, yet somehow not big enough for what she was about to attempt, as she approached the first ridge. The radio crackled with static, the SEALs on the ground calling for cover fire pinned. Down and desperate, the signal was weak, but the fear in their voices was not. She dipped the nose of the A-10 toward the canyon mouth, the walls rising on both sides like jaws waiting to close around her. The altimeter dropped rapidly, numbers spinning, like a dare from gravity itself. The turbulence hit hard, the wings flexing, the instruments flashing warnings, but Elena did not pull back. She pressed forward, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. She knew that hesitation would kill her faster than any missile. The ground blurred beneath her like a river of dust and shadow. Her eyes caught the flash of movement ahead. Enemy vehicles moving fast through the pass. She armed her cannon, the sound of the rounds spinning up like thunder trapped in a cage. The first burst tore through the silence, the echoes bouncing off the canyon walls like a storm trapped between stone. Her aim was true, but she could feel the drag of the narrow path. The ground seemed to reach for her, the warning alarms. Screamed, pull up, but she did not. She adjusted by instinct, the wind clawing at her wings as the smell of burnt metal filled the air. The SEALs' voices came through again, clearer now, shouting coordinates, disbelief in their tone when they realized she was already there, already flying below the radar, below their fear. One of them said, "Over the comms, she's insane, she's actually doing it." Elena gritted her teeth, sweat tracing lines down her temple as she pushed the throttle further. The canyon curved sharply ahead. A blind turn. No radar, no margin for error. She had seconds to decide whether to climb or trust her gut. The instruments flickered. The sunlight vanished as shadows swallowed the cockpit for a heartbeat. Everything was silent. Then something flashed on the ridge above. She tightened her grip, and the world tilted into chaos. The ridge loomed ahead like a rising wall of stone and dust as Major Elena Ward gripped the controls, her pulse steady, though every instinct screamed. To pull up the canyon was narrowing faster than expected, the walls closing in on both sides, leaving barely enough room for the A-10 to breathe. The jet shuddered as wind currents twisted through the pass, and she could feel the aircraft fighting. Her hands like a wild beast that did not want to be tamed. The flash she had seen moments ago became a streak of smoke from the ridge above, and her eyes caught the glint of a launcher too late to evade it. She rolled the A-10 hard to the right, the missile streaking past her wing so close she could feel the shock wave rattle through the cockpit dust and fragments pelting the canopy like rain. The alarms blared again, but she ignored them, her voice calm as she reported contact even as the canyon ahead blurred with the speed of her descent. The SEAL team's voices returned over the comms, their words broken by static. They were trapped at the base of the ridge, taking heavy fire. They needed cover. Now, not later, Elena understood there was no room for hesitation. She pushed the throttle further. The engines roared as she dipped even lower, the sound vibrating through the ground itself. She lined up her sights on the ridge where the enemy was firing the tracer rounds dancing across her. Canopy like fireflies of death. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and the GAU-8 cannon unleashed its wrath. The sound was a low growl that rose into thunder, and the earth below seemed to erupt. The rounds tore through the rock face, shredding the position where the missile had come from. She flew straight through the smoke, her vision momentarily blind as the world vanished in ash and light. Her mind focused only on the rhythm of flight, and the sound of her breathing steady, like the ticking of a clock. When the smoke cleared, the canyon stretched ahead, twisting again in sharp angles that would have broken a less experienced pilot. She had to rely on memory now, on instinct, the radar useless, the instruments flickering. The A-10 felt heavier than before, as though it too was beginning to question the sanity of its pilot. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that only came from standing too close to fear and realizing it could be outflown. But the mission was not over, not even close. The seals were still pinned down, and she had to circle back for another pass. The only problem was fuel and altitude. She had neither enough to do what needed to be done. She could either climb and lose the element of surprise, or stay low and risk never coming out of the canyon at all. Her decision came without thought. She turned the aircraft into the curve of the canyon, hugging the wall so close that sand and rock scraped against the wings. The ground below was a blur of tan and gray, the air hotter and thinner as she pushed deeper. The radio came alive again. The SEAL leader shouting coordinates for a second position, enemies moving fast toward their location. She could almost see them now, tiny figures in the shadow of the cliffs trying to reach a point of extraction that might not hold much longer. She leveled her wings, steadied her breathing, and prepared for another run, the cannon still smoking from the last barrage. Suddenly, the right engine coughed a metallic rattle that sent a tremor through the frame. She glanced at the gauge's fuel pressure, dropping faster than it should have hit from the missile blast. Maybe she couldn't tell. The A-10 was a tank in the air, built to take damage, but even a tank had limits. She adjusted. Power to compensate the plane shuddering, but holding she could not afford to lose altitude. Not here. Not now. Ahead, the canyon widened slightly enough for her to make the turn back toward the SEAL position. She could see flashes of gunfire on the far ridge and the heat signatures of moving vehicles closing in. It was now or never. Her voice broke through the comms, steady and calm. "Hold your position," she said. "I'm coming in low." Her hands moved over the controls like she was conducting something ancient, something dangerous, something that did not forgive mistakes. The A-10 dived once more, the wind screaming across its body as the walls raced by inches from her wingtips. She opened fire again, the roar of the cannon drowning out everything. Else explosions rippled across the canyon floor, the shock waves buffeting the aircraft as she pulled up just enough to clear the next rise. Smoke trailed behind her in a gray ribbon that marked both victory and warning. She didn't look back. She couldn't, not yet. The SEALs were shouting over the radio again, voices filled with awe and disbelief. She had given them the opening they needed, but as she checked her fuel and instruments, her stomach tightened. There was no easy way out of the canyon. Her fuel was low, her right engine flickering and the navigation systems failing. She would have to climb out manually, trusting her sense of direction through dust smoke and turbulence. She pulled the stick back, the A-10 groaning as it began to rise, the canyon's edge still distant, the horizon barely visible through the haze. Every vibration felt like the aircraft tearing itself apart. Her hands held firm, her mind empty of everything but the climb. The sound of metal straining filling her ears, and then just as she neared the ridgeline, a sudden flash of light caught her eye ahead. It was not the sun. It was something moving fast directly toward her.